We're going to look at the last verse from the prophets in Malchuyot today, from Zechariah. So just to note that at the end of Sukkot Zimra, we actually have a few of these verses that we've said in Malchuyot that come in a row. If you remember, the end of Sukkot Zimra, at least in many traditions, is to finish with the Song of the Sea. The Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam, after the children of Israel crossed the sea, that's one of the core moments in which God reveals God's self as king. We think of God revealing God's self as king perhaps at Sinai, but the Song of the Sea is one of those moments when God becomes king. And we remember way back when we said, Adonai Yimloch le'olam va'ed, that's the end of the Song of the Sea. The Lord shall rule, or is ruling forever and ever. So when we recite the Song of the Sea at the end of Sukkot Zimra, right before we get to Baruch Hu in the morning prayers, then we have three of these verses that come in a row. We saw that a few days ago in Psalms. That's what we looked at yesterday. That's the last verse in Obadiah. And today we're going to look at the next verse, which comes from, you can see in the box here, Zechariah 14:9. This is the chapter in Zechariah with a lot of Bayomahu on that day. In the future, everything's going to be different. And you might also recognize this from Aleinu, which we recite every day in every prayer service now, but originally was the introduction to the Malchuyot section. So this is a familiar verse from the liturgy from different places. So we're going to look at the ways in which the rabbis understood this verse and asked about it. Probably the most famous rabbinic understanding of this verse comes from the Talmud in Psachim. And those of you who are on the Daf Yomi train, we're headed there in a little while. So the rabbis ask, what do you mean Bayomahu Adonai echad u'shmo echad? What do you mean on that day in the future God will be one? I thought God was one right now, right? Like we say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. So why are you telling me that this is a prediction of the future as opposed to something that's happening right now? And this is, I think, one of those answers where the question is better than, one of those moments where the question is better than the answer. Like they're going to offer two answers. But just to note, when we say this verse, Bayomahu is always on that day, not like next Tuesday, but like the ultimate next day, like on that future day, in the end of time days, on that day, Adonai will be one and God's name will be one. Just sort of highlights the fact that God is not one right now, which again is sort of this daring dance that we're playing out here. Well, I thought God is one, so what gives? So this is what the Gemara answers. Rabbi Yachab Bar Chanina said, Lo kalam hazeh olam haba. This world is not like the next world. Olam hazeh al besorot tovot omer baruch hatov v'ametiv. In this world, when something good happens, you say this bracha, blessed is the good and the capital good and the one who makes good. But on bad news, you say, blessed is the true judge. In the world to come, there isn't going to be any blessing on Besorot Ra'od, on bad news, presumably because there won't be any. And it'll all be Hatov V'Metiv. So what does it mean for God to be one? What it means for God to be one is that there won't be anything bad. And that's obviously not a world that we live in now. So yes, maybe God is one from a sort of unity monotheistic perspective, but God is not one in the sense that the world is whole right now. But in the future, God will be one, and that's Olam Haba versus Olam Hazeh. Now they move on and they say Ushmo Echad. What do you mean? That's Adonai Echad. What's Ushmo Echad? So God will be one. There'll only be good news. And what about God's name being one? Who isn't right now God's name one? So we have another drash. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Lo Kalam Hazeh Olam Haba. This is the difference between this world and the world to come. Olam Hazeh nichtav b'yud hey v'nikra b'alef dalet. Aval Olam Haba kulo echad nikra b'yud hey v'nichtav b'yud hey. In this world, we actually can't pronounce God's name. God's name is written Yud Hey Vav Hey, but we don't pronounce it Yud Hey Vav Hey. We pronounce it Aleph Dalet Adonai. Back in the days of the high priest and Yom Kippur, in the times of the Mikdash, in the time of the temple, the high priest would recite God's name, Yud He Vav He, and would pronounce it, but that tradition was lost, and certainly was lost at the destruction of the temple. It's another sign that we're not living in a world in which God's name is unified, i.e., not everything is where it should be. We're not living in the world, in the perfected world, and therefore God really can't be one until that happens. The sign that we live in that world, in Olam Haba, is our ability to recite God's name, Shmo Echad, in the sort of singular way that it's meant to be pronounced, Yud He Vav He, a way that we don't have access to that right now. Okay, so Vayomo Ya Adonai Echad Shmo Echad. Yes, God is one now, but not entirely, and God is not one because we have bad news. God is not one because we can't fully connect to and relate to God's name. The intimate name of God, Yud He Vav He, can't be even pronounced by us, and so we're not yet at that state of one. That's not happening yet. I want to sort of spell this out a little bit. We're going to see tomorrow with Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, similar themes like, is God Echad or is God not Echad? Is God Echad now? Is God Echad for everybody? Is God one? Where is God one? It's not so simple. We often think of it, the three cardinal sins of Judaism, one of them is not to be an idol worshiper. We often think that that's like, oh, no problem. Like, no one's pro-idol. So like, that's not a heavy lift there. But in some ways, saying God is one is more than just saying there's no other God that I'm bowing down to, but also what it means for God to be unified. We're just not quite there. So here's another version of that in Sifrei Devarim. Adonai Eloheinu, this is talking about Shema here. Adonai Eloheinu, Aleinu, Adonai Echad, Al Kol Ba'ei Olam. God is our God, but God is Echad. That's going to be something in the future when that happens to Kol Ba'ei Olam, the whole world. God is our God, Adonai Eloheinu, but God is not Echad until everybody accepts God. That hasn't happened yet. Adonai Eloheinu b'olam hazeh, Adonai Echad le'olam haba. Or like we saw in the Gemara, God is our God right now. God is this particular God of Israel, but in the future, in Olam Haba, God will be one. And then quotes our verse, V'cheinu omer, V'yadonai lemelech al kol haaretz b'yom hahu Adonai Echad u'shmo echad. It's an Olam Haba thing. So again, in this moment of Malchiyot, we are not even thinking about the present tense. We're thinking about the future. What does it mean for us to pray for, to ask for the end of time by Yom Hahu? That's when God is truly going to be king, and that's the Rosh Hashanah that we really want. We don't want just a renewed year where God is king now for us, this little local group, but we want God to be the king for everybody, for all to be good in the world, and that's sort of the prayer and request element that we've sort of morphed into in these verses. We're predicting the future. So there is another midrash that quotes our verse, but it starts off with this verse in Devarim when the Jewish people ask for a human king. When you take possession of your land, you'll say, I will set a king over me, right? Asima alai melech kechol hagoyim. Just like everybody else has a king, we want a king too, so give us a king. The midrash, God never thinks this is a good idea. The midrash sort of plays this out by saying, Asima alai melech, Rabbanan Amri, the rabbis say, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, in this world you ask for kings, and kings arose in Israel, but they caused you all to fall by the sword. You suffered as a result of having human kings. Saul caused them to fall on Har Gilboa. David led them to disease. Achav stopped the rain. There was a drought. Tzidkiyahu destroyed the holy sanctuary. That's a little bit of pinning the blame on Tzidkiyahu, but still, when Israel saw what happened to them under the hands of human kings, of kings like the other nations, they began to scream, we don't want a king in Israel. We want our original king, our first king. For Adonai is our judge, Adonai is our lawgiver, Adonai is our king, Adonai is our savior. You might remember that from Ein Keloheinu. Ein Kimalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu. That's talking about God as our king and our savior. The Holy Blessed One said to them, by your life, that's what I will do that. Kach ani oseh. How do we know this is going to happen? God is going to come back as the ultimate king. So there's a world in which we think we want a human king, but the truth is the king that we really want is God, and that's the one that will happen in the future when we've realized that we've tired of all the local kings. So we're going to jump in tomorrow with Shema, and Shema is going to be the capstone verse for Malchuyot, but just sort of to leave us in the prophet section. This is the last of the Nevi'im. For Malchuyot, we are looking towards the future. We're looking for Bayom Ha'u, on that day when everything becomes good and right in the world, when God is king, not just over us, but over the whole world, and making us sort of safe and peace-filled in the world that we hope to live in.